Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Hahn, and I'm facilitating the Monday afternoon webinar series for Corwin Press. Welcome to 5 Keys to Creating a Balanced Assessment System with Rick Stiggins. And thank you all for joining today. It's appreciated. We can go to the next slide. Oh, if we can go back one, that would be great. So why don't we go to the slide that's next after the slide number 2. So here we go. Oh, give it 1 second. We just wanted to mention upcoming webinars on March 6th. Kristen Anderson on Hattie's new #1 effective size, collective teacher efficacy. March 20th, Francis Skip Fennell on your mathematics formative assessment game plan. April 3rd, Diane Stayer-Fenner and Margot Gottlieb on strategies for building ELL's language power. And April 17th, Gravity Goldberg and Renee Hauser on what do I teach readers tomorrow. And you can also see a full schedule of upcoming webinars by visiting corwin.com/webinars. And so, just for the meeting today, I want to go through some housekeeping issues. And really, it's just one, how do you communicate with us? So we do all of our communicating through the chat feature. If you have a technical question, you can send that through the chat feature to the host. That'll come to me, and I'll answer that for you. If you have a question for Rick during the presentation, send those questions regarding the presentation to all panelists. And you can select all panelists or hosts from the drop-down menu once you select chat. So questions for Rick, send them to all panelists. And to let you know, we will answer all questions when they're asked. So send them along as you think of them, and Rick will answer them for you right away. With that, I would like to now turn this over to Nicole Franks, Marketing Manager for Corwin Press, to introduce Rick. So Nicole, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, while he needs no introduction because his name is synonymous with classroom assessment, it is my honor to bring you our presenter today, Mr. Rick Stiggins. Rick has amassed over half a century of experience with what works in assessment of and for student learning, from the systems level to the classroom and into the PLC. Rick is the author of numerous books, articles, and papers on assessment practices and their impact on students and student success. Today, Rick will discuss his 5 actionable steps to creating a balanced assessment system. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Rick.
I want to begin. Rick, why don't you start again? You were on mute. I just start from the beginning.
Am I okay now?
You're fine now.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Greetings from out in the frontier here, out in Portland, Oregon. What I want to talk with you about today is an opportunity that has emerged with the Every Student Succeeds Act, in which we're spending a lot of time in a lot of locations thinking and rethinking how we want to develop our assessment systems of the future. And there's an invitation for innovative ideas. What I want to talk about is what needs to underpin those innovative ideas, about the development of what I'm calling balanced assessment systems. And the co-occurrence of the Every Student Succeeds Act's emphasis on assessment and rethinking about assessment with the evolution of our society turns out to be pretty crucial. And the reason it's crucial is that as our society has evolved, as it evolves, so must its schools, because those schools are called upon to meet new needs, and they are being called upon to do that. And my point here, my big deal point here, is that as schools evolve in the service of that agenda, we also need to have our assessment systems evolving to align with the purposes of schools. And so what I'm contending these days, adamantly and in every forum that I can get to listen to me, is that we need a new vision of excellence in assessment in which it's used primarily as a teaching and learning tool. And I'm going to expand on that as I continue my presentation. I'm almost at the point of saying that it's time to abandon a vision of excellence in assessment that was born in the 1940s and 50s and remains in place today for worse in this case, because we've evolved beyond it. And I'll show you what I mean by that as we go also. See, the new assignment that the institution has been given is both evolving socially at the local level and being codified in federal education policy. It used to be that we want to leave no child behind. Really? Because that's not the mission of the institution, the institution that most of us graduated from. Now we want every student to succeed. Really? If that's the case, then I submit to you that what we're talking about here is a much more expanded mission than the institutions that most of us graduated from. Let me expand on that a little bit. What we're hearing as society's directives for the schools that we're to create is that they're to narrow achievement gaps. They're to reduce dropout rates. Keep these keenly in mind as I go. Universal high school graduation. All students, I mean, we read this in the media continuously or hear it, all students ready for college and workplace training. I just learned recently that the standards that we're aspiring to that used to be Common Core standards are now called college and career readiness standards. I'm not sure the standards have changed, but the idea has changed. We want, society is asking in very specific terms for us to make sure all students become lifelong learners under the leadership of the local education systems. That doesn't align with what it used to be, because the primary mission of the institution used to be to weed out the unwilling and unable, that is, we call them dropouts, and rank the rest based on achievement by the end of high school. A dependable rank order was the mission of the institution. What we've learned in the last 20 years in very clear terms is that those who drop out and those who finish low in the rank order fail to develop the essential lifelong learner skills that they're going to need to survive in, let alone contribute to, the ongoing development of our society. And that's why we're hearing narrow achievement score gaps. See, if you want a dependable rank order by the end of high school, dependable rank order, differentiation among students, you don't narrow achievement score gaps, you expand them. The more differences you can get among students, the more dependable will be the rank order. Do you see how mission conflict comes into play here? Now, we're still being called upon to do both things, and I'll expand on that as we go too. But the point is that the mission is to be sure all students at least are entitled to become lifelong learners. That's what Common Core is about. Leave no child behind. It's what every student succeeds is about. It's not about all kids coming out of school like cookie-cutter copies of each other. That's not it at all. But there's a foundation of essential lifelong learning. The assessment's role used to be to provide evidence of inequities, produce a dependable rank order based on achievement by the end of high school, and serve as a basis for separating the winners from losers. This is what assessment did and does. The grading process was intended to do this. In addition, however, we're not absolved from that. But in addition, society is saying, help overcome inequities, narrow achievement score gaps, keep successful students succeeding, and help struggling learners succeed too. promote universal academic competence, at least with respect to lifelong learner competencies. Well, I submit to you that this expanded, maybe two-part role changes everything when it comes to assessment. And what we need to be building is assessment systems capable of doing these things. And here's the cool part. We know how to do that. And so as I go through the presentation, here's my outline. What I want to talk about is a reconsideration of why we assess. What's the purpose? A careful reflection on what we assess by way of learning targets. Really critical discussion of how we assess those learning targets for those purposes. In addition, I want to talk about how we share results so as to meet all users' information needs. And then finally, the real capstone to the presentation, to the discussion I want to have is how can we possibly use assessment to help all students believe that success is within reach for them. So there's the outline. And what will result from our answer of these questions is a strong foundation for what I'm calling a really truly balanced, effective, instructional relevant local assessment system. I'm not talking about statewide assessment systems here. I'm talking about local assessment systems designed to serve a variety of purposes that can only be served at the local level. To the extent that a state wants to play a role in the development of assessment systems, their role needs to be to help local districts develop high-quality, balanced assessment systems. If they do that, their needs will be met. To talk about why we assess, that is the purpose for assessment, we must understand to begin with, and this will be our agreed upon definition as we go, assessment is the process of gathering information to inform instructional decisions, gathering data to inform educational decisions. But given this definition, it's incumbent upon us in all assessment contexts to know answers to three critical questions. Here's the first one. In that context, what decisions are to be informed by the results that are gathered? Who's making those decisions? And therefore, here's the critical bullet, what information do they need in order to make the decisions that they need to make? You see how these tie together. Assessment is the process of gathering information to inform instructional decisions. What decisions, who's making them, and what information do they need? If we don't start with answers to these questions, how do you build a quality assessment, a productive assessment? Well, you can't. Now, again, considering this idea of why we assess, the purpose, I submit to you that there are important assessment users at least these three levels. We have people who use assessment at the classroom level, at the interim benchmark level, common assessments, and then annual standardized tests. I'm going to contend that all three of these are important. That is, there are users of assessment results who make important decisions at each of these three levels. But see, the decisions are different, and the information needs are different. And I'll amplify that as we go. In addition, we build balanced assessment. So my point here is that we build balanced assessment systems when we build them to meet information needs at all of these levels, not just the one that happens once a year. In addition, balanced assessment systems serve us in at least three different ways. It's popular and common these days to talk about formative assessment. That is, how can teachers diagnose student needs and respond to those needs? And so we're referring to this as formative assessment. Now, in my parlance, I want to talk about a second kind of formative assessment. We call it, in my world, assessment for learning. It's a formative application because it wants to diagnose and help respond to kids' needs, but it does them in a special way. How can we help students? Now, I want to bring students into the assessment process while they're learning. Self-assess, remain in control of their learning, work productively, and learn more as a result. So there's formative for the teacher and formative for a partnership between student and teacher. And then finally, of course, there's the old standard of summative assessment, in which we ask the question, kind of like a dipstick in the crankcase, how much have our students learned up to this particular point in time? Once again, all three of these are important. Now, what I provided in advance was a handout that I hope you've been able to download that crosses these three levels of assessment, classroom, interim benchmark, and annual, with these three kinds of applications: formative, assessment for learning, and summative. And what results is a 9-cell table, each cell of which identifies who the key decision makers are, provides an example of the kind of decisions that they must base on assessment results in that cell, and then provides information on the nature of the information needs that they bring to the table at that time. If you've had a chance to download and look at the handout, you'll see that the key decision makers are at the classroom level. At the formative level, key user is the teacher, needing information on what comes next in the learning for my students so I can respond to their needs. Continuing across at the classroom level, and I'm not going to do all 9 cell tables, I just want you to see what the structure is. At the classroom level assessment for learning, the key decision makers are students in collaboration with their teachers. And the key question is, what comes next in my learning? And students need information on where they are now in their learning so they can know what comes next. You see, they need to be inside the assessment process as it's unfolding on their behalf. And then there's the summative application at the classroom level, which is different in nature. The key decision maker is the teacher. And the key decision is either what grade appears on a report card or what information about mastery of standards gets reported on a standards-based report card. Teacher's responsibility. My point in all of this is that, now dig this because it's a critical point. Each cell in this table makes a unique contribution to student academic well-being through decision-making that the other 8 cells can't make. And if you have a chance to look through it in detail, you'll see exactly what I mean. What that means is the information needs of users in each of these cells needs to be part of a balanced assessment system. And the other point I want to make is this one. It is how critical the classroom level of assessment is in a balanced assessment system. Because, I'll read this to you, if assessment isn't working productively day to day in the classroom while students are learning, that is in the top line of the table, that is if bad decisions are being made based on inaccurate evidence due to inept classroom assessment, then the other levels can't overcome the dire consequences for the learner. If good decisions aren't being made as learning unfolds, you don't fix that every few months or once a year. The damage has already been done. And it turns out that if we manage the classroom level of assessment effectively, we have about 20 years of international research on this now, revealing that the use of the classroom level assessment as an instructional intervention can yield subsequent achievement score gains on high stakes tests of between 0.4 and 0.7 of a standard deviation, with the largest gains coming for struggling learners. I'll stack that up against any school. The point is that the heart of a balanced assessment system isn't the once-a-year annual test. It serves very few purposes, but they're important. The critical decisions are made by students and teachers and their families, students' families, while the learning is happening. So my point is that the heart of the system is the classroom, but the other levels are important too. Balance, balance, balance. I hope I have been clear about that. So the key to developing good quality balanced assessment systems is to begin each assessment event, regardless of level, with a clear sense of who's going to use the results and what are they going to use them to do. Then we build our assessments to fit into the answers to those questions. This is like common sense reasonable, and I don't see a lot of people doing it. This most recent generation of high-stakes tests would have been a whole lot more productive if people had asked these questions 6 years ago. Now, 6 years later, nearly $1 billion later, we get results, the connection to the instruction of which we can't make, or at least it's difficult to make. What are we doing? We're not being clear about our purpose. And so, as I advocate for the development of high-quality local balanced assessment systems, I say we got to be clear about purpose. That's issue number one. And let me know if you have any questions about this. So as we build our list of keys to successful assessment, number one is we answer the question why, and the answer is to meet the needs of all users, not just the big and important ones that happen once a year and hold the purse strings. Have I been clear about that? Time for balance. Okay, so again, let me know. Jeff, let me know if you have any questions coming in. Let's go on to key number two. And in this case, we need to know what it is that we need to assess in any particular context. What this calls for is clear and appropriate learning targets or achievement expectations or curricular outcomes. Call them what you want. We've got to be clear. I use learning targets because it's something kids can relate to. And what I want to say about this, I'll start with the key to success right out of the chute. We must begin each assessment event with a highly refined vision of the meaning of academic success. And there are different kinds of academic success, for sure. And sometimes we want students to develop mastery of domains of content knowledge. And sometimes we want them to use that knowledge in particular ways to reason and solve problems. Math problem solving, scientific reasoning. There are patterns of reasoning that are important to us. Sometimes it isn't merely cognitive stuff. We want kids to be able to demonstrate certain performance skills that we know are important, like speaking a second language fluently or some artistic or physical performance. And in addition, very often, we want students to know how to use their knowledge and their reasoning and their skills to create products that meet certain standards of quality, achievement-related products like term papers or lab reports, where there's a tangible entity the student creates. Learning targets need to be clear to us, and they need to be clear to our students, whatever they are in this array. And what that means in specific terms is that I want us to begin instruction with clearly articulated, pre-established academic achievement standards. And I want those to be ordered in learning progressions so that they unfold over time within and across grade levels in a manner that's consistent with the way learning happens, because the student's ascendance of these progressions is what turns out to be critical. Remember where we started, we said students need to know where they are now in their learning so they know what comes next in their learning. Well, what's the next? What's the order? And third, productive assessment systems where each and every teacher in each and every classroom absolutely must be a confident, competent master of the targets that their students are expected to master. Surely you would understand why I would include this in the list. Over and above the instructional implications, how can one devise a quality assessment of a target that they themselves have not mastered? It's not possible. In addition, I want standards deconstructed into scaffolding that kids can climb on their way to mastery of each standard. And put on your teacher hat. It's never the case that first kids can't master the standard and then they can. That what happens is over time they ascend through levels of proficiency up to a place where they've mastered the standard. It would be good if the classroom level of assessment could help them ascend that scaffolding also. And I want the learning target shared with learners from the very beginning of the learning, in terms that they can understand and with examples to reveal to them what success looks like. My, over the years, philosophy has been kids can hit any target that they can see and that holds still for them, but if they're guessing at what success looks like, how can they possibly succeed? It becomes a random event. So these things are key. And of course, our assessment tasks and scoring schemes must reflect these intended learning targets. So alignment between instruction, opportunity to learn, and accountability for learning, or opportunity to learn with help along the way, tuned in to how they're learning. These are, often people are surprised. If we had more time together and I was doing an all-day seminar on this, you would be surprised how much time I want to spend on learning targets before we ever talk about how to assess them. Because if we don't have these, there's nothing to assess. That's my point. So, key to success number 2 is assess what? Clear and appropriate learning targets. Jeff, is there a question?
No, nothing yet.
Nothing yet. Okay, good.
Yet, but I encourage everybody to send questions, and please send them through chat to all panelists.
I'll take that as good because I hope I'm being clear. Okay, let's go on to the assessment issue. In this case, when we talk about assess how, there's something that I need to address that has not been addressed in the 70 years of our collective assessment legacy. In this case, what I'm contending is that we understand the differences between high and low quality assessments. And certainly the people who develop those high stakes once a year tests know those differences. But 99.9% of the assessments that happen in a kid's life don't happen once a year. They happen day to day in the classroom at the behest of their teacher. And so what that means is, if we're building a sound assessment system, then each of those teachers must understand at least the basic principles of how to gather good evidence, because if they don't, well, look back at the chart on the decision-making process. Bad data leads bad information, bad evidence leads to bad decisions. So a foundation of a balanced assessment system is a foundation of assessment literacy, of understanding at least the basics of how to create and use high-quality classroom assessments. Now, many of you may nod when I say this. I don't remember them teaching me a whole lot about that in teacher school. If I could hear you, I'd ask you all to issue an amen on that. So what I want to talk about is what it means to be assessment literate in at least the basic terms. To begin with, to create a high quality assessment, one must be capable of selecting a proper assessment method from among the array of possibilities given the learning targets. And what we must understand is then, I'll come back to that in just a minute, then using that assessment method, how to frame an appropriate sample of student performance in order to make a judgment about the student's level of proficiency. You know, any test is a sample of all the questions we could have asked but didn't have time for. Well, the question is, how do you plan an appropriate sample? It turns out there are rules of evidence for how to do that. An assessment person understands those. And once I begin to build the assessment, then I need to build it out of high quality test items or tasks or exercises and high quality scoring schemes. If it's going to be a multiple choice test, got to have good items, not bad ones, and you got to know the difference. If it's going to be a performance assessment, we need high quality scoring rubrics, not poor quality ones. And you got to know the difference in order to create those. And finally, it turns out that each assessment method and context presents sources of bias, things that can creep into the assessment process that can distort results. An assessment literate person understands at least some of those sources of bias, can anticipate them, and understands what to do to try to control them as much as possible. things can go wrong within the classroom assessment environment. Things can go wrong in the cultural or linguistic link between the test and the reader, the student. There's a number of things, but they're all known to us, and we know how to remedy them if we can anticipate what they might be within the context. Look, here's a list of the available assessment methods. It's exhaustive. There aren't any others. We must choose from these in any particular assessment context. Task number 1 is to know which method to use when. It turns out these methods aren't interchangeable. And then we need to know how to use each one effectively, how to create one, how to anticipate sources of bias that can distort, and how to make sure that it's of high quality, regardless of the method that we choose. We know how to do this. That is very specific and intentional, high-quality, team-based learning programs, professional development programs available readily. I'll say more about that as we go, to help people know these things. We know what they need to know. We know how to help them know it. All we're missing is a universal opportunity to learn for those who need it. And I don't begin with any assumption that everybody is assessment illiterate. Not at all. Many of us got very good at it just because we made it a priority for ourselves and while we're teaching. I'll say more about how to get to those things. But once again, the rules of evidence. These methods are typically not interchangeable. You don't get to have a favorite just because it's none of them inherently superior to any others, and it brings with it strengths and weaknesses, and you gotta kind of know what those are in order to be an artist creating a productive classroom assessment environment over time. All of these things are knowable. Somebody said there's a question.
Yes, I have a question. Should assessments assess things that are not required to master, or things that have only been introduced, especially in the lower grades when they are just beginning to learn?
The only targets that should be assessed are those that are the focus of instruction at the time. That is, or over time, a definite period of time. So, for example, I might assess student mastery of a target right at the beginning, and I might involve my students in that assessment so they can see where they are now in relation to where they want to be. I might assess such targets maybe repeatedly over time so they can watch themselves coming closer and closer to success. But my assessment is purely in the service of helping me as their teacher and the student understand what comes next in the learning to continue progressing towards success. And at some point, if accountability kicks in and I need to document the extent of their mastery, then I'm documenting the extent of mastery that have been the focus of instruction between me and them. At any point in time, the only thing students can be held accountable for are the things they've been given the opportunity to learn. I can do that while they're learning. That's assessment for learning. So they can watch themselves grow and develop that sense of internal efficacy, that sense of I'm okay, I'm not there yet, but I'm going to get there if I keep trying. That's the kind of motivational disposition that we want to go for. I hope that's a helpful answer. If not, come back. Okay? Okay, so in this case then, the key to success number 3 is each and every assessment must provide an accurate reflection of students' achievement. I'm really fanatic about this. There can be no exceptions. Because if we gather undependable evidence and base instructional decisions based on that in the undependable evidence, then we're going to do harm. It's not okay. the right to mismeasure student achievement is not an entitlement that comes with academic freedom. This is a matter of professional ethical responsibility. Now, I want to add quickly to that we're only going to be able to meet that standard if everybody's given the opportunity to understand the differences between sound and unsound assessment practices and how to apply them. And not everybody has been given that opportunity, so it's hard to hold people accountable. But that's my aspiration of assessment literacy, where everyone involved at least at some level understands how to do the assessment job well. And I spent my career happen, and I'll die. So listen to me. I say to you again, the classroom level is really critical. If assessment isn't working productively day to day in the classroom, during the learning, that is, if bad decisions are being made based on inaccurate evidence due to inept assessment, the other levels can't overcome the dire consequences for the bad decisions that are made. We will remain unable to achieve the universal foundation of assessment literacy in place all the way from the classroom to the boardroom. What drives me crazy these days is people at the highest levels of policy setting unsound assessment policies because they have no idea what they're doing, because they've not been given the opportunity. They're doing the best job they can. They've not been given the opportunity to understand the differences between sound and unsound assessment practices. Now, we're going to talk toward the end about some resources that are available to help you with that. We need that foundation. So, why do we assess? To meet user needs. What do we assess? Clear targets. Using high quality assessments. And then, key number 4 has to do with how we share the assessment results. And in this case, I want to make another balance point, and it's a simple one. It turns out that sharing information results effectively varies with context. So, for example, the keys to effective communication of assessment results, either in the formative column or the assessment for learning column, is that we deliver feedback to students achieve results in terms that describe their performance budget in ways that reveal to students how to do better the next time. And then we provide next times as they grow, continuing to provide that kind of helpful instructional coaching feedback. Metaphor works really well for me there. Guided practice with descriptive feedback. So kids can watch themselves grow during their learning. That's formative. That's supporting learning. In a summative context, the result is to describe the sufficiency of student learning in relation to preset standards. What that means is, which standards have they or have they not mastered? That's what we must communicate to the decision makers. If we're assigning grades, they have to link back to standards mastered or not mastered. Otherwise, they're useless communication. Because out of summative, we can also help instruction. In this case, then, very simple key to success number 4 is communicate assessment results in a timely, in an understandable manner, checking with the recipient to ensure that they understood it. When was the last time we did that with annual test scores? Sometimes they're hard to understand anyway. So that's key to success number 4. That adds to the list. Why? To meet user needs. What? Clear targets. How? Quality assessments with results shared in a manner that fits the context of the communication. Now, I have to check my time because this is all, in a sense, prologue for what I want to talk to you about next. And it is the joy of my career to have been able to spend a lot of time on this next idea. The key to the fifth key to success is a verb. Student success, they promote it. And I want to talk to you about that in some very specific terms. And there are dimensions of the assessment environment that we have typical emotional dynamics of being evaluated, assessed from the student's point of view. Student, again, back in your days in school, you'll see what I mean here. Remember society's directives. Narrow the gaps. Reduce the dropout rate. Universal graduation. Everybody ready for college and workplace training. Everybody and striving for excellence. If we got kids giving up in hopelessness, then forget about all of this, because it ain't going to happen. The revolutionary insight on this concept, maybe not, is that these things can't be achieved by hitting struggling learners between the eyes with a bigger baseball bat. If they're on the verge of giving up on themselves, hitting them between the eyes like that is exactly the wrong thing to do, because it'll simply throw them over the edge. The revolutionary reality that students' emotional reaction to assessment results, no matter what they are, high range or low, those results. It turns out that balance is critical. Y'all understand, right? Who's in charge of the learning, and it isn't you. It's the learner that's in charge of the learning. We're merely coaches. We're guides. If the student isn't doing the learning, there isn't any learning happening. A student responds in terms to assessment results. Again, regardless of where they are in the learning or productively. Now dig this. That's an expression from the 60s for those of you who are younger. They respond productively when we have brought them to a place where, upon seeing those results, they are able to say to themselves, I get it. I know what these results mean in terms of my learning. I know what to do next. I can handle this. Now, the fourth bullet is just critical. Therefore, they conclude, I choose to keep trying. Do you see how the critical statement is not met yet? And they can be in this place, the probability of their success and therefore our success pretty high, because a counterproductive response leaves the student saying, I don't know what this means. I have no idea what to do about it. Oh, I'm too darn dumb to learn this stuff anyway. I quit. Do you see? If there's a critical standard that's really important for this munchkin and they're in this place, there's trouble, and it isn't just trouble for them, it's trouble for us because we're not doing the job that we've been hired to do. The question we must ask ourselves is, what can we do to help them? Here's another version of the revolutionary reality. What students think about and do with assessment results is at least as important as what we adults think about and do with those results. This is the partnership that we've been missing. We've been operating on the assumption if you just get the right test results into the right hands at the right time to the right adult, they'll make the decisions that'll make schools work. That's not unimportant. Of course it's important. We got to do our job well, but it leaves half of the decision makers out of the equation. Students get to make data-based instructional decisions first about learning, and it turns out they get to go first. When they see whatever results we give them, they're saying something to themselves. For struggling learners, it can be something like this. Can I learn this, or am I just slower? You see, my point is, if they got on side of that, it doesn't matter what you decide. Or, is learning this worth the energy that I must expend in it? Or what about the really struggling learner who's asking, is trying to learn this worth the risk that I might fail again in public? Because that
just hurts too damn much. They're not to try, and they drop out. You see my point? How can we help our students make the right decisions in this context? The decisions that will lead to productive learning for them, they got to be a part of it. And it turns out that over the last 20 years, a team of us working around the world on this problem have been able to develop principles of assessment for learning, one of whom is my colleague Jan Chapuis, who's written a book called 7 Strategies of Assessment for Learning. And in it, she taps into wisdom that came to us from around the world, Australia, New Zealand, where what we need to do from a student self-assessment point of view is keeping them aware of answers to 3 critical questions. Always and continuously an answer. Where am I going? Where am I now in relation to where I'm going? And how can I close the gap between those two? Notice where the locus of control resides in that question. Now, it turns out that that Jan has identified a series of very specific strategies. For example, provide clear learning targets to students from the beginning of learning, along with examples. To help them know where they are now, things I said to you before are going to become relevant. Provide regular access to descriptive feedback so I know where I am now in relation to where I want to be, and then teach students the skills of self-assessment so they can begin over time to generate their own feedback and begin to partner with their teachers to understand and set goals for what comes next in their learning. And then to help them close the gap, we need to design lessons focused on specific attributes of success, teach students to revise their work in terms of those keys to success, and engage students in ongoing self-reflection about their own growth, giving them the opportunity to keep track of and share with others the learning that they're growing over time. There's much more to say about this, but what this has the effect of doing is bring students while they're learning into the self-assessment process in terms of the success is within reach for them. And once again, I say to you, we have compelling evidence, quite literally from around the world, of profound achievement score gains that come when students are engaged in the classroom level of assessment in these terms. So key to success 5, but I wrote huge in place of number 5, is keep every success is within reach if they keep striving for it. Be sure they have faith in themselves. It turns out to be critically important. So these then are our keys. Balance purposes, meet all user needs, clear and appropriate targets of success, commit to quality assessment throughout the assessment system, communicate results effectively as a function of the context, formative or summative, and motivate students with success, not with anxiety and intimidation. I submit to you, this is a whole new world when it comes to assessment. I submit to you that we know an awful lot about how to make these things work. Now what we need is the opportunity for everybody to build local systems that do this out of a foundation of assessment literacy from the leadership at the building level, the district level, and through leadership at the classroom level. We know how to do this. We need the opportunity. And we've designed a whole bunch of things that can help. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole now, and she can talk about those things. Or we can answer questions. Maybe now you have some questions as you've seen my whole, I've done it 10 minutes. If you've seen my whole presentation, what's your reaction? What are you thinking? What are you wondering?
And anyone could just send questions to all panelists, and we will answer your questions now if you have any questions.
Thank you so much for that valuable information, Rick, and for the resources that you shared. Jeff, while we have this moment as we're gathering questions, some people mentioned that they didn't know where to find the handouts that Rick had attached to the webinar. Can you share where they might be able to access those?
They are on the home page of the webinar when you go to sign in. They were attached there. But I would also recommend that when you send them the link to the video, maybe we send those out again as well.
All right, so for those of you that maybe didn't see
I have something to say about that too.
So for those of you that didn't see those attachments when you signed in, the two documents that Rick referred to, the framework for balanced assessment and the rating scales, they will be part of the email that you receive with the link to this webinar recording. But Rick, did you want to say something about that?
Nicole, can you hear me? Yeah, I do want to say something about that. In the Corwin publication, revolutionized assessment is one. The balanced assessment systems is one of that's intended to provide you. That handout that I had for you is a set of rating scales for doing a definition of where you are now with relation to each of the keys to success. So that can be balanced assessment systems guide with the apples on it. Design school district leadership team step by step through that self-analysis. But we wanted you to have the rating scales so you could see what you would be analyzing, what you would be evaluating. This is a way to get things in place that need to be there to have a balanced assessment system. Nicole, you want to say more about that?
Yes, basically what Rick just shared with everyone and what you can see on Rick's screen right now is that these two tools that are Rick's most recent publications with Corwin, Revolutionized Assessment and Balanced Assessment Systems, provide you with the implementation tools for how to design your assessment system, how to articulate it with district and school level teams, and then preparing for implementation. So, you know, the outline was shared today, and then, you know, how to implement it really is what we go into depth in these two resources. And as you can see on the screen, you do receive 20% off discount code for attending the webinar today. The code is N17194, and you will be emailed that code as well. And Jeff, I think there's some questions.
Yes, I do have one. Do you think, Rick, do you think it's important for students to be assessed by a teacher they are familiar with versus one they do not have a relationship with, or does that matter?
It matters. It matters a great deal. It's like everything in the formative or assessment for learning context. There needs to be a keen and well-developed relationship between student and teacher in the formative and assessment for learning environments. In the summative context, it's not quite so critical because what it's going to come down to is students are called upon to demonstrate whether they have or have not mastered a standard. I'm not so worried about that, but I am worried about making sure that there's a good, solid partnership relationship while students are learning. If assessment is happening while students are learning.
Terrific, thanks, Rick. And that's the last of the questions.
All right, so then Rick, you can advance to the next slide.
Okay.
All right, so I want to invite you to find more resources like the ones that Rick shared today to help you plan and implement assessment for student learning using Corwin's online assessment toolkit. You can enter the web address that you see below the QR code. It's bit.do/assessment toolkit to access free downloadable resources, and a promo code you can use on any Corwin assessment title to help further your learning. As you know, Corwin offers free resources right on our homepage. You'll find some of those under the assessment link, but we invite you to utilize our brand new assessment toolkit to be able to access some of these resources to continue your planning, particularly at the systems and the classroom level. Rick, you can advance to the next one. And I'm very excited to invite you to take it one step further by joining us at the Corwin Assessment Institute being hosted October 23rd and 24th in Chicago of this year. You can come and see Rick Stiggins live and in person at his keynote and his session that he will be presenting there. You can find out more by visiting corwin.com/institute, and we'll be sure to email all of you an invite to the Institute as well. Thank you for attending today, and of course, thank you, Rick, for the knowledge you shared. We love your passion and the way that you empower us to do your work every single day. Watch for an email in the next week with the webinar recording and your certificate of completion. Have a good evening, everyone.